Welcome back. We are now going to hear about fire safety and construction. Thank you so much to our sponsor, Warringtonfire and Alpha Tame Elements. Our first speaker is Dr. Mostafa Jafarian, Principal Certification Engineer for Facades and Structures at Warringtonfire, who provides clients with advice about performance of various structural fire protection systems and facade systems under fire conditions and methods of improvement. He also is working closely with BSI communities, developing standards related to facade tests. And our second speaker is Peter Stephenson, Business Development Manager at Warringtonfire, who in his role coordinates the development of the Middle East fire engineering consultancy activities, in addition to supporting the development of fire strategies, building assurance inspections and fire systems analysis projects. Dr. Mostafa Jafarian, it's over to you.
Let me take the chance here to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you are joining us for this talk. And thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. Today, I'm going to present the presentation which Mr. Stephenson and I prepared for today on fire safety and construction. To give you an overview of what we are going to talk about, we are going to talk about modern method of construction, construction safety, key points relating to fire safety, how we can improve on those fire safety key points, and how Warringtonfire can help you at the end. As we all know, with the advancement into new technology, that gave us the chance, to have the chance to development of new products, which the manufacturer started to come up with the new types of products. Also, it allowed the construction side to come up with a new method of construction, which gave the advantage and the freedom to architects to come up with the new designs that they have, with the design which are going to be more sustainable, faster in construction, and with a higher level of quality, as well as being very economical in terms of the overall design. While those method of constructions and the new materials would give more liberalism in terms of the design and allows us to be more in line with fulfilling the new requirements, still for fire safety and safety, we have to go back to the first principles, and which are basically saying that the construction should be safe, it is fit for purpose, and in compliance with the rules and regulations. This is just to make sure that we would avoid any unintended tragic incident, as we all been witness of them throughout the years. One of them being Grenfell, which opened up the idea of the global discussion around the fire safety and issues around them, and that led to either amendment or justifications of the rules and regulation all around the world. As a part of those reviews which has been done on over UK regulations, there has been some suggestion put forward and with regard to regulations, and that's although that being based on the UK regulation, that are quite general and it could be applicable for all other countries as well. That means that one of the recommendation is that the rules and regulations should be based on a risk and proportionate to the type of construction that we are dealing with. All the works that we are going to do and is going to be conducted, it should be conducted by competent people with the clear rules and responsibility, with enforcement in place that to make sure that everyone at the design stage, they are aware of the rules and regulations. And also there should be some rules and regulations in place to enforce using appropriate materials and making sure about the quality of the end products. Also, there are some responsibility for whoever is going to use those constructions. And if they have any concerns, they would raise it formally so those could be addressed properly. That is giving us and taking us to the idea of that there are so many parties in those recommendations that they have to work at the same time and together. However, we can break them down in two main parts of the design and execution part, which that means that at the design stage, we have to start reviewing architectural drawing and design and making sure that we know about the occupant's characteristics so that we could establish the fire safety objectives and basically identifying what is going to be the fire hazard and possible consequence for each of those fire hazards, so that when we are having all those information, that would allow us to establish a trial fire safety designs, which by identifying the acceptability criteria and the method of analysis, we could conclude and reach to a final conclusion about establishing what is going to be the fire scenario that we are going to use for analysis. And when we have all those information, we could go through the designs and identify what are the requirements and what is the end use of the products and how they are going to go under one umbrella, and so that we could go on the execution part, which is the next stage, which is quite important, if not more important than design. It is equally important at the design stage that we would choose the product which would comply with the identified performances, and the performance of the product are identified as a part of a system, aside from the fact that individual products would meet the certain requirements. Also, we have to make sure at the end of the day that in terms of the quality assurance of the end product, we are satisfied and in compliance with the rules and regulations. Both of these parts is basically could be set on the umbrella of a qualitative design review procedure, which is a QDR kind of a procedure. Also, as I said, the execution part, it is as important as a design stage, because when the design stage is identifying the requirements and is stating that what should be used and what are the requirements based on rules and regulations. When it comes to the execution part, we are going to use a specific type of products. Therefore, to make sure that we are satisfied with with those regulations and those products could meet the requirement which has been defined in the design stage, we have to use a couple of products which are certified to be sure about their performance. However, products themselves being certified, it is not a good level of quality of saying that definitely they are going to perform as they are intended, because the performance of a product is highly depends on how they've been installed and how they are going to be performed is going to be installed on site. Therefore, the installation of the products is going to play a very important role in the overall performance of the system. That's why it would be would be required for whoever is going to install those products to be certified. And also to make sure that we are going to avoid any poor workmanship, then it would make sense to have site inspector to review and overlook what is being installed. And that's why, and this is the idea that so many standards, including Approved Document B of the UK, trying to promote the idea of certification and accreditation. But it is not just limited to the UK. We have seen a couple of countries around the world which they are trying to promote this idea. But at this point, it does make sense to define what is a third-party certification. Basically, third-party certification is a process which certifying a manufacturer's product or individual who are going to install or maintain a product, and they are going to undergo an independent appraisal to make sure that the product itself would meet a certain criteria according to the standards, and or if this is going to be any individual, they are familiar with the product range and the installation method and how it's going to be maintained. A couple of examples of those certification marks, you can see them here. The next stage is why we should go through using a product which are third-party certified. How is that going to help us with the quality assurance of the products? Basically, the reason for promotion of that kind of a certification is because a certified body would try to check basically the parameters which will affect the performance of the products and a system which has been certified. That includes checking the quality management system of the manufacturer of the key elements of the products, and also they would do factory production control of the manufacturing site of the critical components of the products, and they would independently sample the products just to make sure that the products are not just being manufactured for one specific test for the sake of certification. And then they would send those sampled products to a third-party lab to make sure that they would independently would be tested. And when all those results are back to the certification body, they would review it alongside the results from the QMS, factory production control. And if there are all documents are documented properly and if they are following a certain regulation based on the certification which is going to be provided, then they they would offer a certification to the manufacturer, which those certifications then they are going to be located on a public domain, and they can be seen by whoever is going to use those products with the field of application and how they are going to be used. And in some cases, the certification body would provide with a certification mark to the manufacturer or the supplier. But that process is not going to stop there. The process is just going to carry on within the years, because they want to make sure that the quality of the products are not going to change within the years. That means that they would repeat quality management system and factory production control again, and they would go through the manufacturing methods, process, raw materials, which was used at the beginning, and they would compare it with the initial audit to make sure that no change has been made, and they would request, depending on the type of certification, they would request of a repeating test within of the product which are in the certification within a specified interval. And if the results of those tests came back to be equal or better compared to what is being tested originally, then they would reinstate, and all other documents from the QMS and factory production control are on the system. Then they would reinstate the certification. Otherwise, that could potentially lead to suspension or withdrawal of certification. So the bits which I'm going to get to it is that how Warringtonfire can help us on the fire safety assurance, how on all these processes, how Warringtonfire can fit in and how it can help its client. Basically, as you know, Warringtonfire currently has many offices and labs all around the world, from North America to UK, Europe, Middle East, Asia, and Australia. And our services ranges from testing, from fire resistance, from testing, reaction to fire testing, fire technical assessments, furniture, and then relevant certification, which relates to fire, marine, non-fire certification, and some other certification that we are offering. And also we are offering service on the fire engineering side of the aspect of the designs as well, that includes fire assessment, fire risk assessments, structural fire engineering, facade performance under fire condition, structure analysis, fire strategy, third-party fire system review, third-party Q&A service, CFD, fire modeling, fire evacuation modeling, disabled access certification application, fire safety audits, fire safety due diligence, construction, and the diligence fire safety survey. And that would take me to the fact that that Warringtonfire is forming of a certification, consultancy, and testing. That means that we are expert, and we know about the testing and the relevant information and limitation with regard to certification, and that would help us when we are working and collaborating on the fact that when we are providing any consultancy. So that would take me to the end of this talk, and at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Mr. Stephenson, for his talk. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Mostafa, for that very interesting presentation. What I'd like to do is actually take the opportunity to build on some of the sort of the points that Mostafa raised, in particular recapping on the building life cycle and actually developing that more into a discussion, and hopefully some further questions on fire strategies and the interaction between the built environment and the systems testing, etc. So what I'm going to cover is some pieces on building assurance, which we feel is very, very important and often forgotten, and also the fire strategy, looking at the objectives of a fire strategy, its structure, the basis and understanding the risks involved when developing a strategy, and as I mentioned, the building assurance. So looking at the fundamentals, you may recall one of Mostafa's slides showed the life cycle of a building, from the design through to the building or refurbishment, the occupation, reconstruction, and then back to the design process. Now, many of you will be familiar with the overall sort of design process of within the built environment, but the design and construction are actually quite small phases within the building life cycle. And obviously, when a building is going through refurbishment or decommissioning and deconstruction to go back through into the cycle of design, that period is very small. Occupation can be 50, 100 years. We've got lots of heritage buildings that are now coming into tourism within the GCC. And in the rest of the world, there's buildings that can be several hundred years old, but they still need adequate fire protection. So we need to look back. Who do we protect? That includes employees, members of the public. Also, we may need to look at plant and assets, and also the environment, and often very, very easily to forget the actual brand of an organisation that we need to protect. We also need to consider within the design the authority having jurisdiction. We may be following either a prescriptive code to demonstrate compliance or going for a performance-based fire safety engineering approach. But ultimately, we do have to satisfy the AHJ. So where can we influence? Well, obviously, we've mentioned design. We can look at the product specification and performance, systems commissioning and testing, management of systems and training, and also the decommissioning phase. And I'll introduce the term fire safety health check, which I'll come back to later on in the presentation. And these reviews and health checks can be undertaken at any stage of the process. So people, I won't make the assumption that people are familiar with fire strategies, but we do promote a fire strategy being developed for every building, whether it's in design or actually in occupation. If there's not a fire strategy available, one should be looked at that's suitable for the building. There are certain objectives we need to look. We mentioned life safety, and I'll focus more on that, but the environment, the building and the property, and also the business protection are very, very important. But I'll focus on the life safety provisions, which I touched on just a few moments ago. We need to look after the occupants, the visitors. There may be contractors working on the building. The building may actually be in construction, which again poses very serious risks to people working. And also firefighters if there is an incident. And the fire strategy should provide the guidance for developing operational firefighting practices. For people that aren't familiar with the fire strategy, we could call it a design basis. So that it has various inputs. It needs to look at the management of the systems and the auditing, recognising the mandatory framework, i.e. codes in the Middle East here, in the UAE. The UAE fire code would be predominant. In Saudi Arabia, Saudi building code. All these things need to be factored in. We need to look at the objectives, which I've just touched on earlier. Also, the risk and hazard assessment forms a very, very key feature of the building. If the building's a speculative build and the actual occupation doesn't know, it could be type, it could be a hotel, it could be residential. But if it's mixed use and the actual end user isn't known, then we need to make some assumptions. And these assumptions need to be documented in the fire strategy. We also need to look at the building characteristics, access in and around. Is it close to water? Are there adjacent risks? All these are important to consider. And also the occupancy. Will the user of the building be young, old, able, persons with reduced mobility, asleep or awake? All things that need to be factored in. And quite often there are practical issues that actually we may not understand until we actually get involved in the project. Mostafa mentioned the qualitative design review, the QDR, used the relevant stakeholders actually get them to give us these practical issues that they have through experience of running their buildings or similar buildings. So we need to set the scene within the fire strategy. Where possible, we can introduce innovation. Now, this is a very key topic for discussion, probably. There may be some questions on it. But innovation in the built environment and the testing and certification, there's often quite a big lag because innovation races forward. Testing and certification does take a while to actually come into alignment. And if we're doing a performance-based fire engineering approach, we do need to document this very, very clearly so that the end user of the building fully understands the fire systems, the management procedures that need to evolve, and bring in the international best practice to the project. Just going a little bit further into detail, I mentioned about understanding the risks. Well, there's certain key features that are standard within the code. Things like compartmentation, smoke control systems, fire detection, and fire suppression. These things will be governed by the code of them. But we may have little knowledge of actually the fire safety management procedures that will be introduced by the end client. But we do need to acknowledge control of ignition sources and control of combustible materials. During the design phase, we may not actually have knowledge on that, but this will be an imported risk to the building or occupation. So the fire safety management is quite key. And the reliance on procedures, again, is something that would need to be discussed within the building. And then if we've identified the code requirements, management procedures and control of risks, what if something goes wrong? What is the response to fire? Well, generally, there'll be two approaches. There'll be the first aid firefighting. We may have fire wardens in the building that are trained to use fire extinguishers in the early stages of a fire. Or the guidance from company policies and procedures under health and safety may say, no, we don't use the fire extinguishers. We will rely on safe evacuation from the building on alarm and wait for the intervention of the civil defence. So actually understanding the response to fire in the event of an incident is very, very important. So the three key factors is managing the risks and conducting a risk assessment. Risk assessments elsewhere in the world is very common practice and covered by regulations. UAE Fire Code does cover this, but the adoption of risk assessment I would recommend is actually undertaken for all buildings, so you do actually understand the risks that are there and any factors that need to be addressed to maintain the risks as low as reasonably practicable. And we must always bear in mind the operational response, as I mentioned, particularly if civil defence are required to attend. Moving on more to building assurance. So if we make the assumption that we've had a building nicely put together, passed all the approvals, etc., we'll then probably go into a period of defects liability. Now that's a great opportunity at the end of a project when the occupier is starting to understand and learn about their building if there's any issues. And the handover phase is very, very important. Handover should include the fire strategy. The building owners should fully understand what's included in the fire strategy to develop the management procedures. It should include the design concepts, relevant specifications, materials, and the type of construction that's within the building. The documentation should be provided. People should be trained with that information in mind, and this should form the basis for the ongoing health checks of the building. We've all learned to look after our own bodies through eating well, exercise, etc. But do we give that same recognition to the building? I think maybe that's a good point for discussion. There should be regular inspections and simple things like the cause and effects of buildings. Are they well understood by occupiers? You know, my personal experience in the Middle East is people view fire alarms as a bit of a nuisance. It will go off, the alarm's gone off again, but don't really understand what's going on in the background. And if it is a fault, cry wolf can happen. People may ignore an alarm call, and actually the event is genuine. So it's very, very important to have complete faith in the systems within the building, from design through to commissioning and through to handover. So the stakeholders, it may be a multi-occupied building, the stakeholders should all be familiar with the fire strategy, understand which codes and standards have been applied, have a copy of the fire strategy, and fully understand the cause and effect and their actions that are required. These should be regularly reviewed, and fire testing is ultimately very, very important. Without tests, we cannot progress anywhere. Now, many of you will be familiar with things such as passive fire stopping. Very, very important. This forms part of the passive protection to the building. Sprinklers within the region is very commonplace. Elsewhere in the world, provision of sprinklers to control fires isn't so prevalent. And there quite often is a high requirement on the passive inspection. It must be understood by the building management team that on an alarm in the building, certain functions and actions to be undertaken. Evacuate safely. If people need assistance, they are given that assistance. On arrival of the emergency services, they require.
Sadly, we are having a few technical issues there. We're just having a few issues with Peter's sound. We're going to try and get him back in just a moment. Otherwise, we will move on straight to our questions. Let's try and get Peter back just for the last 5 minutes of his presentation. Peter, let's see if we can hear you one more time. Okay, Peter sadly is no longer with us. We're going to try and get him back. But in the meantime, fantastic presentation there. And thank you so much to Dr. Mostafa. You are here with us. Thank you for staying on the call with us as well. It looks like we have Peter back, actually. Peter, are you with us? And how's your sound?
Hopefully I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Let's listen to the last 5 minutes of your presentation, and we'll move on back over to the Q&A after the last 5 minutes of your presentation. Please do continue.
Yeah. Could you just confirm where the sound broke out, please?
Oh, the sound broke out.
When you're talking about fire stoppings.
Oh, fire stopping. Okay, yeah. I was just basically running through the importance of understanding the fire stopping and its interaction with the other fire systems. In the region, we do have very good cover of particularly in high-rise buildings. People do get concerned of living in high vertical cities, but the reality is, when we look at egress components, we have the horizontal escape and the vertical escape components. If people are required, because generally the tall buildings, the staircase is designed for a phased evacuation, so people on the floor of the incident, above or below, may be required to evacuate if there is a necessity, and then the evacuation can be cascaded through the building. But we have things like the sprinklers to control the fire. We have pressurized staircases to stop smoke entering the stairs. And again, where I was leading to with the passive elements, because we have such good protection with regards to sprinklers and the other control systems, the passive sometimes often gets forgotten. They should be documented on the fire drawings for the building, should be regularly tested. And if anyone is coming into your building to do work, I would suggest that they do actually have a permit to work if they're involved in any work that involves moving or altering the arrangement of the passive fire protection. Also often on inspections, and this is all around the world. Before I came to the Middle East, I actually worked for the AHJ in the UK, and the number of contractors that were doing a simple task, for example, putting a pipe or cables or realigning cable trays, would remove the passive fire protection, not understanding what its purpose was and not actually putting it back. So if you've got a wall that's either 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, if that passive fire protection is missed, then the fire can spread unchecked. Not just the fire, the smoke as well. And as we know, the smoke is the real killer in a fire incident. So that was the sort of the key points that I wanted to reflect on, looking at the building life cycle, understanding the building insurance and the importance of that through the long occupation phase of the building. I think with that, if I may just conclude and hand back over to Laura, and we'll take some questions. Thank you very much.
Fantastic session there. I'm so glad you were able to finish as well, Peter. Sorry we lost you for those few moments, but I'm glad we finished that up. Dr. Mostafa as well, fantastic session there on the modern methods of construction, what it means for the future of fire safety, as well as best practices and how regulations are changing. So interesting. But let's start with some of our audience questions. People have been writing in. Dr. Mostafa, what are the parameters that we need to consider before we specify the products?
Well, thank you very much, Laura. That one would be defined based on the fire safety and fire strategy, which is going to be reviewed at earliest stage of design, just to make sure that all the materials are going to comply with the requirements to make sure that the construction is safe. At that stage, then we have to go back to when that decision has been made, then we have to discuss it with the manufacturer just to make sure that the products that they are going to supply us, it does meet the requirements which are defined in the fire safety strategy and fire risk assessments which are in place. Following those procedures, then we can see that whether those products are going to meet the requirements or not. And if they do, then based on the field of application and discussion with manufacturer how they should be installed, then we can proceed with those products.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dr. Mostafa. Peter, at what phase of the development do you think a fire strategy needs to be implemented?
Very good question. If the building is part of a bigger network of buildings, for example, then it should be part of the master planning. So fire really should be on the agenda from day one, right the way through to completion and handover, as I mentioned. Master planning is very important because we need to actually understand what fire and emergency response we require, what water supplies they need, the access routes to and around the building. So the advice would be fire strategy from master planning and concept right the way through the design period through to a completed document agreed by all parties forming part of the AHJ approval with the handover to the client.
Thank you, Peter. Dr. Mostafa, usually the range of tests will be limited to the prescriptive methods defined in the standards. How can those results be used for site condition?
Well, it is absolutely true that when we are testing any products and when a manufacturer obtains any sort of a certification, they have to follow specific standards, harmonize a standard or any relevant guidelines which are in place. So absolutely right. When you're talking about site conditions, those prescriptive designs may not be applicable. So there are two ways of addressing these points. The main thing is that we have to always work with the fire engineer of the work, because in those scenarios we could either do an ad hoc test while those tests are not fully following the prescriptive designs and the arrangements suggested by the standards, but it would be quite representative of end use and site condition. But which means that by going through those ad hoc kind of testings, a series of information could be provided for the fire engineer of the job to provide some level of assurance that in those conditions, that product could still meet the requirements. Also, alongside that, still we do have limitation with the furnace sizes, with furnace configuration, so we may not sometimes be able to conduct those ad hoc tests. So that means that if we have enough information and enough fire test evidence in place, we may go down to the route of doing some enduring judgment and assessments that could evaluate the data against the site condition and the new configuration that they want to be used in. And based on all those side-by-side information and based on those evaluation, then we could basically adopt the use of that product in for the end use, which would be the site condition.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Mostafa. Peter, there's so many elements to consider, like you run through understanding risk, managing risk, building assurance and building trust. What exactly does a good fire strategy framework include? What does it look like?
Okay, it should be a combination. So when the document's evolving through the design process, it will take on various draft formats, then approval in alignment with probably the contract, whether the fire engineer is working the architect or to the client directly. There'll be a process right the way through of approval, and it's always best to include civil defence authorities as AHJ into those discussions. Mostafa mentioned in the qualitative design review, the stakeholder engagement is key on part of that. So the final document will run through all the sort of objectives and sections that I mentioned. It should include the sort of the basis of include the framework for regulations, the management systems, objectives, risk analysis, building characteristics, occupant characteristics, the classification of the hazards, etc. And that'll form part of the overarching document, which I would say probably breaks down into about maybe 6 key areas. The policy statements, i.e. the management of the building buy into the strategy. Then there will be a fire safety management strategy within that, the evacuation strategy, the firefighting and smoke control strategy, and the firefighting strategy, and also the fire protection strategy. So there's lots of individual strategies that are all embraced within the overarching document. But people will probably be familiar with fire policy drawings, which ultimately will show where the egress routes are, signage, fire compartmentation, etc. So there is a document, both written and visual through drawings, that explain the system. But it does sad to see in the UK, we used to have fire certificates for buildings, and quite often they used to be issued and used to go on the shelf, come out once a year when the fire officer came round, and then go back on the shelf. And people didn't really understand what their safety systems were. And when a building goes through any form of refurbishment, the fire strategy should form the basis for the contractor to then develop the refurbishment process. If it requires structural alterations to the building, that could impact on the overall safety profile of the building.
Very interesting indeed. And of course, innovation is a very hot topic, especially in this part of the world. What do you think is going to be the top innovation in the future of fire safety in the next couple of years then, Peter?
I think that's a very, very good question. And I think nanotechnology is quite a one that comes up quite often. I'm smiling to myself actually, because we've things like drones and the such like, they can provide such amount of information and data. And I think we're moving, particularly people will fully get this now through what we've all experienced through COVID, is data is the new gold. And I think the more data we can get back from our fire systems, the fire systems are becoming more sensitive, they're becoming clever, they can test themselves, and they can actually make the FM manager's job a lot easier. But it's all part of this overall understanding of the building. So I think nanotechnology will certainly be there, and I think correct use of data to improve safety.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Peter. We have quite a long question coming up next from one of our attendees. So we saw at Grenfell Tower that the correct installation and maintenance of passive fire protection, particularly compartmentation and fire doors, is arguably more important than the initial installation. Is there anything more certification bodies can do to ensure correct installation and maintenance, rather than leaving this to building control and all the civil defence? Is initial testing and certifying a product the correct point where certification bodies leave the process? Or could they be more involved going forward? Who would like to take that?
Well, I can start, and I would imagine that Peter could build on it, if that's okay.
Sure, of course. Yes, please go ahead.
Well, in terms of the
You go first. Yeah.
In terms of, you're absolutely right. The key point, as I mentioned during the presentation as well, the key point to make sure that some product would provide you with a certain level of performance. It is not just down to the product only; it is onto the installation as well. Hence, the idea of using approved installer, and that should be in collaboration with the manufacturers, because the manufacturers, they know their product, they know how it should be installed and how it should be placed on the market. And they do have certified, a couple of manufacturers, as far as I know, they do have their own. They are discussing it with the installers, and they would teach them how those products should be installed, or how they should be applied. In case of a fire doors, then obviously they have to know that how those should be installed. The next level of assurance comes from the site inspectors, approved site inspectors, that they would know the products and that they have to do the inspection on them. So when they are going on site and reviewing those installations, make sure that the product is going to perform as is expected, and that performance is not going to be downgraded because of a poor workmanship. This is very critical, because if the person who is doing the site inspection is not trained for those type of installations, or reviewing how the product should be, the end-use product, how it should be, how it should look like, reading through the certification and limitation given in those documents, then I think it would be very difficult to to say that whether something was done appropriately or not. So from my perspective, there are a couple of stages here. One, there should be a clear connection between the installer and the manufacturer. And following that, there should be a site inspector who understands the certifications and the detail in terms of the field of application of those products, to make sure that at the end they would understand what should have been installed and how it should have been installed in the first place. And over to Peter.
Yeah, well, my answer actually was just going to refer back to probably some of the earlier conversations with regards to the importance of the fire strategy, because it does tell the storyline. It does then dictate the requirements for fire rating throughout the whole building. I think one of the just two sort of takeaways really. I think we're all living in a world that is a bit of a tick in the box culture, where everyone wants to tick the box and then move on to the next, the next task. And that can also be within building design, be part of that approval process, tick the box and move on. The fire strategy will be the basis for people to understand the building. But I think there's a general lack of knowledge out there, and particularly with building envelopes. I think knowing to ask the right question to the fire engineer is very important, because quite often fire engineers on projects will answer the question they think you're asking. But if you can have someone like Dr. Mostafa who understands the building, understands the certification and testing procedure, he will know the right question to ask of either the project fire engineer or the relevant manufacturer or supplier. And for me, it's part of that building assurance process that I've been mentioning several times, that a simple ask the right question at the right time will then propagate probably quite a big discussion rather than tick box, move on.
Great answers there. Just before we wrap up, very quickly, our last question. Does Warringtonfire have any presence in East Africa? We often need a fire consultant on certain projects, but we have limited options here. Who would like to take that?
Well, just very quickly, we're a global organisation, and I think we're sort of fairly unique in the market, that we do have the fire advisory part of the business where I work, and also the testing and certification. So we understand buildings wherever they are in the world. If the building is following the codes, we understand how codes work, and if it's a building that requires performance-based engineering, would be quite happy to have a conversation with the person that asked the question. There's certainly, around the globe, there are certain areas we can't for sort of diplomatic reasons, etc., where there are restrictions on working. But elsewhere, we're just happy to have the conversation and help.
Thank you very much. We're losing your sound a little bit there. However, we do need to wrap up now. A brilliantly informative session there. Thank you so much. Just before we go, a couple of sentences from each of you. Dr. Mostafa, some of your key takeaways, the key highlights you would like our audience to go away with.
Well, I have to just, if I want to summarize the presentation from my side, I have to say, make sure that fire safety is a long procedure. It starts from day one, and you should start from designing a stage to defining the products, making sure about that products are fit for the purpose, and then getting to the installation side and making sure that the system is fit for the purpose as well. So this is a long procedure. Just make sure that you wouldn't break any of these this part of this chain, just in order to have a safe construction.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Mostafa. Peter, your final remarks.
Just a couple of quick points. Check if your building or your project has a fire strategy. If the building is under occupation, do you look at the fire risks of the building? Simple, moving ignition sources away from combustibles, but so often that doesn't happen. And one of the key things I mentioned, cause and effect. We could have a complete presentation on fire alarm systems and how they're integrated. Make sure the building functions as it was designed.
Brilliant. Fantastic key takeaways. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us here today. Hopefully we're going to see you in person next year. But thank you so much for your time on this. Thank you.
Thank you very
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.